So today we are talking about yeast doughs. Who here has ever made dough from scratch? One of you. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. So this is something that I really enjoy doing. Today we're making pizza dough, and we're using this piece of equipment. This is a stand mixer. This happens to be a KitchenAid, all right? And I want to show you how to use a stand mixer before we even go into the ingredients. The KitchenAid typically has 3 attachments. One, you have your paddle, all right, to make like cookies and such. You have a whisk to make beaten egg whites or heavy cream to turn that into whipped cream. And then we have our dough hook. The dough hook is the attachment we're using to make pizza dough, all right? How do you put this in? There's a little notch up here and there's a little notch in the dough hook. You have to line them up, all right? And then you turn it, all right? So that's step 1. This is the bowl. Now the bowl has this little notch right here. That's gonna align with the hole that's back here. You have to make sure those align, all right? And then there's also 2 little cones on either side. The circles on the outside have to align over the cones, and then you snap the bowl in place. My KitchenAid is good. Now, this particular model has a lever, and you move it up by swinging it up and down. All right, so now we know how to treat our equipment properly. We're gonna move on to our bread dough. So very similar ingredients to other baked goods. However, there's even less ingredients. To make bread, you need 4 simple ingredients. You need flour, you need salt, you need yeast, and you need water. So flour does what to baked goods? It provides structure, okay? So I have here 1¼ cups of flour, to which I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and this is actually a little bit less. This is 1/2 teaspoon, so I'm gonna add half of it, all right? And then I'm going to distribute the salt in my flour, all right? And I'm gonna set that aside. The other thing that I need is yeast, all right? Yeast is a fungus, and it is the biological leavener in our recipe. So for my yeast, what I'm going to do, I'm going to dissolve it in water. So yeast prefers a warm temperature between 80 and 90 degrees. Can you go a little higher? Yes. However, yeast dies when it comes into contact of a temperature of 138 degrees. That's called the thermal death point. Isn't that cool? Okay. So you want to make sure your water is definitely never that hot. Okay. Can you go cooler? Yes. However, if you do that, it's going to take a little bit longer to rise. So I took my warm water. All right. It was between 90 degrees. It's, what is that? 90 to 100. Like warmer than your body temperature. All right. And then I'm going to put my yeast in my water directly in my bowl. I do that because then this way I don't have to mess with it, and then all of the yeast gets in. I'm going to give it a little shake, all right, so it can dissolve. And then once I do that, I'm going to add my flour. And this is giving me a hard time, just like it can give you a hard time. All right. I always put my water and yeast in first, because this way there's not going to be pockets of flour that don't get picked up. Now I'm going to add my flour mixture, my flour and salt, all right, and with the dough hook, I'm just going to give it a little stir. So it gives it a head start, and I know it's almost there. You see, look at that. That's my dough, all right? now that I've done that, I'm gonna add my oil. The recipe calls for a tablespoon of oil. Let's grab a tablespoon. All right, so I have my tablespoon of oil in there. And then it's going to knead. All right. Now we're doing this with a stand mixer. Could you do this by hand? Yes. All right. Miss Leal typically makes bread by hand. I very rarely use a machine. All right, sometimes you have to. With doughs like a bagel, you would have to use a machine because it's a really stiff dough. All right, this is a pretty soft dough, so you could do it by hand. And if you did it by hand, all right, you would have to get a bowl, or you could do it on the counter, all right? But it would take a lot longer, all right? When we're kneading in the machine, it's gonna take about 3 or 4 minutes. When do you know it's done? Does anybody know that? All right, if you don't, that's okay. The dough is fully kneaded once it comes clean off of the bowl, right? Some people say there's something called the window pane test. If you stretch that dough, it should stretch without tearing. All right, but what I'm looking for a dough that is totally homogeneous and it's coming away from the sides of the bowl. And the tool that I'm going to use to take it out of my bowl is the bowl scraper. And the other piece of equipment that you need is a pizza pan. All right, so to prepare my pizza pan, I have a piece of parchment. In this case, the parchment paper is our insurance policy. All right, when it comes to bake our pizza and we have it on the parchment, it is a little bit easier to come up. All right, and as you see, this is just a I think it's 10 inches, 10-inch pizza pan. So I'm gonna take my hand and I'm gonna spread the oil. How much oil? I just did a capful of oil. I'm gonna oil the entire paper, and I'm also going to oil the pan because the paper only covers so much of it. All right. So that's good. I have an oily hand. I'm not going to wash my oily hand. This oily hand is what I'm going to use to pat my oil down.
Pat your bread down.
To pat my dough down. Yes, thank you. All right. So this is what my dough looks like. Now, with my oily hand, I'm going to take my hand and get rid of the dough that was on the dough hook. I'm going to take my bowl scraper and scrape the dough out of there. And I'm just going to make sure it's all combined. All right, now I take my dough and I put it on my paper. All right. Now I take my oily hand. You form a circle. How do you do that? Just bring all the edges in. Turn it around. Now it's oily on both sides. All right. And then with my hand, I'm gonna pat it into a circle. And we're pre-shaping our dough. I'm using my entire hand, so the palm and my fingers, and I'm just going in a clockwise motion. I don't want to tear it. And then what you might want to do is, if you're noticing that it's not really going anywhere, just give it 10 minutes for the gluten to develop, come back to it, and then you can spread this entire dough to fit the entire pan, all right? The last thing you're gonna do is you're going to cover it with plastic wrap, and we're gonna let it hang out on the counter for at least an hour, and then we will bake our pizzas the next time I see you. Okay?